Most people think self-doubt comes from getting things wrong too often. But for some people, it starts the exact opposite way, by noticing things too early and watching nobody respond. If you've spent years questioning your instincts without knowing why, this video will explain exactly what may have actually happened to you. Picture someone saying they're fine. The conversation keeps moving around them. A chair scrapes against the floor. Someone laughs. Glasses clink. Everything looks completely normal. But deep down, something feels slightly off. Not dramatic, just enough that part of your attention stays trapped right there. You notice the tiny pause right before the answer. You notice the smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. Then you look around the table. Nobody reacts. And within seconds, your focus shifts away from what you noticed and turns toward questioning yourself. A quiet doubt echoes in your mind. Maybe I'm just reading too much into this. That moment happens to some people far more often than they realize. Not because they're looking for problems, not because they're unusually suspicious, and definitely not because they're imagining things. There is a reason certain people keep noticing signals other people move past. And there is also a reason many of those same people end up trusting themselves less over time. If that sounds familiar, stay with this for a few minutes, because the explanation is probably very different from the one you've been given before. It usually starts with a moment so small that most people never remember it even happened. You know this moment perfectly. Something changes in a conversation, and suddenly you're the only person in the room looking at it. Picture yourself sitting around a loud, busy dinner table. Someone tosses out a casual reply. "I'm fine." Everyone else moves on instantly, laughing and talking, but you don't. You catch the tiny pause right before the sentence. You notice their smile arrives a second late, forced and hollow. Your mind instinctively stays on those subtle signals longer than anyone else's. A quiet question echoes in your head. Did anyone else just hear that? But nobody reacts. Tiny, you leave the conversation carrying a weight of uncertainty that no one else seems to feel. This sensitivity turns you into a lonely observer, constantly wondering if you're just overthinking. The strange part isn't noticing it. It's being the only one who seems bothered. And that experience actually starts much earlier than most people realize. Most people assume everyone experiences the exact same room. They don't. Think about the moment you walk into a meeting. Most people simply register that the meeting has started. But you? You register exactly who stopped talking the second you stepped through the door. This difference isn't because you're trying to spy. It's because of how your brain filters data. Science calls this sensory processing sensitivity, or a loose information filter. Normally, the human brain automatically drops unnecessary details to save energy. But for you, that filter works differently. More signals, more details, always find a way to slip through the barrier. Different input. You don't just see a room, you absorb its entire atmosphere. And the cost of this input isn't cheap. The more information floods in, the harder your brain has to work to analyze and process it. That's why when you get home, an exhausted question still echoes in your head. Why am I still thinking about this? What feels obvious to you may never reach someone else's awareness. What is crystal clear to you might never even exist in their world. But receiving more information does not automatically make it useful. People see your sharp awareness, but they usually don't see the massive workload behind it. Think about driving home after a crowded social event. The party is over, the lights are out, but your mind is still replaying every single frame of the night. That's because too many vague signals remain unresolved in your working memory. Your brain keeps searching for logic, for a sense of coherence in all that chaos. And the cost of this is mental fatigue, social exhaustion, and endless loops of rumination. That exhausted question echoes in your head again. Why am I still thinking about this? You're still there. The conversation ended hours ago. Your brain didn't. The conversation ended hours ago. Your brain didn't. And after years of carrying that, something much more damaging begins to happen. Self-doubt rarely arrives all at once. It accumulates. You learn to question yourself, not because you were weak, but through the repetition of a quiet trauma. Think about a moment when you quietly predicted a conflict. You warned them, but nobody agreed with you. 3 weeks later, it happened exactly as you thought, but nobody remembers. You already called it. Again. This repeated lack of external confirmation slowly weakens your trust in your own instincts. You begin to hesitate before speaking. You suppress your instincts. You force yourself to wait for evidence, long after your brain already noticed the pattern. A quiet lie echoes in your head. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Experience didn't teach you that you were wrong. It taught you that being right changed nothing. And that bitter lesson quietly changes how you move around other people. Most people assume relationships run on complete honesty. But in reality, many relationships out there actually run on selective blindness. People respond very strangely when someone notices what they prefer to ignore. Picture yourself openly mentioning a tension that everyone in the room is already feeling. Instead of agreeing with you, the atmosphere instantly becomes awkward and heavy. Your sharp awareness accidentally creates exposure, and that exposure creates discomfort. As a result, your accurate observations get dismissed as overthinking or pure imagination, and you begin hiding parts of your own perception. A lingering regret echoes in your head. I shouldn't have said that. Silence. Sometimes, people aren't uncomfortable because you're wrong. They're uncomfortable because you're early. Sometimes people aren't uncomfortable because you're wrong. They're uncomfortable because you're early. But even this is not the deepest part of the problem. Here's the part most explanations out there completely miss. When you look back at the years behind you, at the countless moments where your instincts were just dismissed, you realize the real damage happened somewhere else. Your struggle was never actually about your perception. It was about trust. The human brain simply stops relying on signals that repeatedly receive no validation from the outside world. As a result, you slowly stop standing up for what you observe. Wait. The strange thing wasn't that you noticed those details. The strange thing was how often nobody listened to you. The strange thing wasn't that you noticed it. The strange thing was how often nobody listened. An anxious question is now the only thing left in your head. What if I'm just imagining things again? And that creates a blind spot that most people never identify correctly. There is a reason awareness becomes so exhausting. It's because not every signal you receive is an insight. A lot of those signals are just noise. Remember the moments when your assumptions turned out to be completely wrong. A brain that receives more information also means it takes in more false leads. The cost of this is overanalysis, endless loops of rumination, and a false certainty in things that aren't even real. An anxious question begins to shake in your head. Am I seeing a pattern that isn't actually there? Noise exists. Seeing more does not automatically make you wiser. It just gives you more to sort through. Seeing more doesn't make you wiser. It gives you more to sort through, which means the real skill was never about noticing. This changes everything. The real difference between mastering your sensitivity and drowning in it is not your awareness. It's whether that awareness has structure. Picture two people noticing the exact same unusual signal in a room. One instantly spirals into a loop of overthinking, while the other chooses to act. Structure is the only thing that converts what you observe into a clear judgment. Without it, every detail you see will turn back to bite you in endless loops of anxiety. Without structure, awareness becomes hesitation. But with structure, that same awareness becomes clarity. A light suddenly flips on in your mind. Maybe the signals were never the problem. That's it. You weren't lost in your thoughts. You were just trapped without a way to organize them. You weren't lost in your thoughts. You were trapped without a way to organize them. And that is why finding a way to shape your mind is your most important next step. Maybe the biggest misunderstanding was never what you noticed. Maybe it was what happened afterward. The problem was never that your attention accidentally landed on details other people missed. The problem was spending years treating your own instincts like unreliable evidence. A lot of people assume awareness automatically creates overthinking, but more often, overthinking only starts when your awareness has nowhere to go. Some people move through life looking for absolute certainty, but you learn to live with patterns that appeared long before certainty arrived. That's a very different experience. You weren't carrying too much awareness. You were just carrying it alone. You weren't carrying too much awareness. You were carrying it alone. I'm curious about one thing. What is a moment you noticed early, doubted yourself, and later realized you weren't imagining? Not a theory, a specific moment. If these videos help you put language to experiences you've struggled to explain, you can subscribe. There will be more conversations like this. The next time something feels slightly off, pay attention to what happens next. Not around you, but inside you. That's usually where the real story begins.